You may have seen this headline today or yesterday coming out of Alabama. And the reason you may have heard about it is because they just had a hearing about it. But Alabama Republicans have just introduced a bill that would not only force children in school to recite a Christian prayer every day, or at least make their school say we're going to recite a prayer every day, it would threaten those public school districts it would threaten them by withholding the funding they need if they didn't pressure students to say this stuff. That's how disturbing this is. I'm going to show you this bill here. This is House Bill 231. It's 5 pages and it's kind of repetitious, but let me scroll down to like the actual wording here. They want to add an amendment to the Constitution of Alabama, last revised in 2022. And look at this, because they spell it out here. What do they want to do? They want to require local boards of education to adopt policies requiring every K to 12 school to recite the Pledge of Allegiance and a prayer consistent with Judeo-Christian values at the commencement of each school day. Let's just pause there for a second. They want to force every school district to adopt a policy that requires every school to say the Pledge of Allegiance and some Judeo-Christian prayer. Why? I don't know. We'll get back to that. Then they want to provide for the report and investigation of violations. They want to make sure it's really easy for people to rat on school districts that don't do this. And then they want to require the state superintendent to withhold state funding allocated to certain offending local boards of education. So if you don't force kids to say the pledge and the prayer, they could take away your funding. And then they want to authorize the legislature to further reduce funding upon continued violations. Unfreaking believable. Then you have the writing of that down here. The only part I would draw your attention to here, because I read you most of it, they just say we want a prayer representative of the Judeo-Christian values upon which the United States was founded. They don't actually spell out a prayer. They just say we want a prayer that's Judeo-Christian, and it's about the values. Well, let's see. When was the United States founded? We're talking 1776 or something. What was going on then? The Judeo-Christian values said slavery's cool. The Judeo-Christian values said women should not be allowed to vote. I'm not sure what values you want us to honor from the nation's founding. But then it gets more specific in the actual wording here. Suspected violations of this section may be reported to the Alabama State Superintendent of Education, and upon the receipt of a reported violation, the State Department of Education shall investigate the alleged violation. If the state superintendent, based on the results in the investigation, determines that a local board of education or any school has shown a continued pattern of intentional refusal to comply, look at this. The state superintendent shall withhold 25% of the state funding allocated to that local board of education for the following fiscal year. If you don't force all of your schools to say the pledge and the prayer, we're going to take away a quarter of your budget. And if you keep not doing it, the legislature can take away even more. That is what they are trying to pass now in Alabama. It is unbelievably insane. And by the way, saying the Pledge of Allegiance and a Christian prayer, that's just saying 2 Christian prayers. Because the only reason all these Christians want to say the Pledge of Allegiance now is because it has under God in it. So they really just want 2 prayers. And to tell school districts that the state's going to deprive you of necessary resources if you don't play along, that is just educational blackmail. Alabama.com, AL.com, the newspaper, they pointed out that in Birmingham, one of the biggest cities in Alabama, Birmingham city schools receive around $158 million in state funding per year. So if they were found to violate this rule, if it passed, they could lose close to $40 million a year in annual funding. And I'm telling you, as someone who has worked in a school district, that sort of thing would be a blow to the children. It would result in teachers getting fired. None of this would help kids. I also found this interesting. When Republicans talked about this in a committee hearing, they made it clear, like, you guys, we're not forcing kids to say a Christian prayer because it's voluntary. Like, they made that clear. Kids are not forced to say a prayer, except we talked about this with the Pledge of Allegiance. If your whole class is saying the Pledge of Allegiance and you, as a high schooler or grade schooler, don't want to, what options do you have? You could stay seated, and then everyone in the class is like, oh, yeah, there's Hemant, the kid who's staying seated during the pledge. Let's make fun of him. You could stand up and not say it, but that's the same thing. You could exit the classroom, so you're ostracized even more. And with the Christian prayer, if you use any of those options, what you're doing is painting a target on your back so that other kids, especially in a state like Alabama that is overwhelmingly Christian, you are making it easier for those kids to bully you. So what this legislation would do, if this amendment were to pass, is just make life more miserable for non-Christian students and Christians who don't want to participate in this little charade of theirs. And again, which Judeo-Christian prayers are going to qualify? Who's writing them? Who's delivering them? Who gets to decide which values are represented here, considering the Judeo-Christian values from 1776 are not necessarily ones anyone ought to be emulating? I also found I was hoping to watch the hearing about this that took place earlier this week, and I did watch it. And what shocked me about the hearing is when the sponsor of this bill, his name is Reed Ingram, he's the Republican who sponsored this bill, he would get up in front of the committee and you would give a little speech and you would say, this is the bill I'm introducing and here's why I'm introducing it. And I want this committee's support and I'm ready to take your questions. I'm going to show you his entire speech in defense of this bill. Are you ready for this? This is the entire speech he made about this bill. Here you go. Let's watch it together.
Thank you, Chairman. This bill is pretty simple. It just puts prayer and the pledge back into school, and it holds the schools responsible to make sure it happens. Any questions?
That's it. That was 11 seconds by my count. Like, he did not want to talk about the specifics of this bill that would completely change up how they do education in Alabama. Because I think even he knows this is a horrible idea, but I really want to get it through, and I hope there's as little attention to this as possible. He was eventually asked some follow-up questions, for example, and I'm paraphrasing, why the hell do we need this? And his responses were pathetic. This is what he said. One of the reasons he offered when one of the lawmakers asked him about it, he said, while student participation is optional, the law was, here's what he said in the yellow part. Our recruiting is down for the National Guard. It's down in every branch of the military. A lot of these kids don't understand what the flag is. Listen, if they don't know what the flag is, then maybe their schools should educate them instead of wasting time to say a prayer. But also, none of these Republicans seem to have ever thought about, why don't people want to join the military? Maybe it's because our country does a lot of shitty things and you don't want to go overseas to fight on behalf of a country that's doing so many horrible things. It also never occurs to these Republicans that maybe more people would sign up for the military and have more patriotism and love America more if they passed laws that actually gave people reasons to love this country. Like, their proposed solution to a lack of patriotism is never, let's do things that make people proud of this country. It's always, well, who cares? Let's just force them to say they love this country. Let's coerce children into saying that they pledge allegiance to this flag. Like, if Saudi Arabia pledged allegiance to their flag and they made every kid say that at school every day, we would call it indoctrination. But when we do it in America, it's called like, oh, it's just patriotism. It's fine. These Republicans never do anything to actually make people want to love this country. Ingram also said, separately from that stupid line about the military, he said, I think it would help on crime. that he thought saying the pledge and the prayer would help with crime. No citation provided. I have no idea how it's going to help. He just said it because he's too dumb to think of actual reasons. So there's nothing legal or ethical about any of this. It's a constitutional crisis waiting to happen. But of course, this is the problem that Republicans want to create because the alternative is improving education and improving public education. And Republicans hate that. They definitely don't want to do anything that will benefit public education. I will tell you the Freedom from Religion Foundation is aware of this bill, and this is what they said in response to it. This bill is an outrageous attempt to impose religion on captive public school students, even as young as 5, says FFRF co-president Annie Laurie Gaylor. Public schools exist to educate, not to evangelize. Religious instruction should be left to the home where it belongs. And that is a fair point. One of the other things FFRF pointed out, correctly so, is that in 1962, there was a Supreme Court case, Engel v. Vitale, that struck down government-mandated prayer in school. And that Supreme Court precedent has held strong for the past 50, 60 years, has not been overturned by this court. Honestly, I'm not sure if even this conservative court would go so far as to overturn it. So despite what Ingram said, none of this is legal. And allowing voters to have the final say on it, because this would be a constitutional amendment, and he pushed that because I think it removes him from taking responsibility over this, that would not overturn the Supreme Court precedent. So it could still be illegal. So there's a lot of steps that have to happen for this bill to become part of the state constitution. Most of them just require Republicans looking the other way. So those hurdles will be very easy to overcome. But I just want to point out, schools are not clamoring for this. Teachers are not asking lawmakers, hey, you know what we need to do at the beginning of the school day? Waste a little more time by making a whole bunch of kids very uncomfortable. No one is asking for this. And I know nobody expects anything useful from like the Alabama legislature, but this is a new low even for them. It's a desperate attempt to shove Christianity into classrooms by wasting time and alienating a whole bunch of students and then punishing school districts that dare to stand up for the kids they represent. In case you were wondering, by the way, Alabama is currently ranked 45th in the country when it comes to education, and they will not rest until they are number 50. Stupid Republicans in this case. Let's stop there. What questions do we have about this? It's infuriating stuff. If that isn't indoctrination, I don't know what is. Oh, just you wait, Raven, until I get to the next stories. Everything's about indoctrination these days. Compelled speech is unconstitutional. You know that. I know that. Republicans choose not to know that. It's always censorship unless they have to force you to say the thing, and then it's totally fine. I don't know. I don't get their logic because there is none. Oh my God, they flagrantly disregard the freaking Constitution. Folks, they're testing the waters. If there's no pushback, it'll settle into law. I hope the ACLU is all over this. I think if this proposed legislation overcomes any sort of hurdles, I imagine this is one of those cases that every single church-state separation group will be working together on to defeat. And I don't think they would have a particularly hard time defeating it. Even as it makes its way to the Supreme Court. Knowing punk me, it's creating atheist radicals. You mean like a bill like this that would force people to pray in school? And then the question is, if you're trying to say Judeo-Christian prayers, but you don't tell people what to say, that opens the door to like malicious compliance. What ways are people going to cite Judeo-Christian values in ways that really make the adults uncomfortable? Because if you want to like cite a section of the Bible, there's a lot of them that are very disturbing. Like, let's go read from some of those. Let's talk about what some of those Christians from the 1700s thought about Black people and women. Let's start saying that stuff. Let's see how that goes. And you can thank a Republican near you for that. They say Judeo-Christian, but you just know they aren't that attached to the Judeo part. I'm not the first one to say this. Someone else said this on social media today, to me anyway. But it is kind of stunning that more Jewish organizations have not actively gone after that label, the Judeo-Christian label, whenever Christian nationalists use it, saying, like, keep our religion out of your mouth. I don't care if it's not like they have dibs on it necessarily, but just pointing out, like, stop dragging us in as if you think you're inclusive. You're not. We know what you're doing. And I don't know why more Jewish organizations are not speaking out against this. Can they please actually concentrate on actual issues and stop this circus? Listen, if you live in Alabama and you can run for local office, please go do it, because otherwise these idiots are the ones who get elected. And the problem is, none of them know what they're doing, but they're the only ones who ever run. And all the smart people I know always have self-doubt. It's what makes them so smart. And so they're never the ones who run. But no, actually concentrating on actual issues is not why you become a Republican politician. So, sorry, they don't know what you're talking about. Why doesn't the whole GOP just go home and pray for crime to stop? Think of the police funding and gun funding that could be saved. I'm right there with you. I mean, why don't they just pray for Elon Musk to find money to save instead of firing everybody whose jobs they don't actually understand? Because none of these people actually believe in prayer. They just know they got to say that stuff, unless you're like Mike Johnson, in which case you think prayer actually works and you're bad at your job. So again, there's that mix. There's a lot of Republicans who are like, I know I got to use the language of religion. I don't have to believe a word of it.